Hello and welcome to this Reformed Church Center program on Asian American experiences of racism and anti-racism. We are glad you're able to be here with us. Now, as we planned something like this, we recognize that there is no such thing as any one Asian American experience of racism and anti-racism, because there are many kinds of Asian American people from different generations, different places in Asia, who live in different places now in the world. And so we've looked to bring in three perspectives on this for today's program. Jerry Yoshida is a member of the Japanese American United Church in New York City. She serves on the Pastoral Formation Committee of the Classis of New York and on the Executive Committee of the Council of Pacific and Asian American Ministries. She has served on the Commission on Race and Ethnicity and on the R89 Task Force for Understanding White Privilege. She is active with RCA Disability Concerns. Thomas Song is a member of Queen's Classis, a minister in Queen's Classis of Korean descent. He has served on the General Synod Council and the Commission on Christian Unity and was a staff member for the Regional Synod of New York. He is co-pastor of Steinway Reformed Church in Astoria, New York, with his wife, Ok Byun. Tiffany Fan was born in Taiwan and immigrated to the US when she was 16. She graduated from New Brunswick Theological Seminary with distinction in May 2021. She has worked as part of a church planting team in the Bronx since 2017. She is called to work with the multicultural ministry there and wishes to continue working with the currently planted ministry after her ordination. We are so pleased to be able to have all three of these folks with us. They will be presenting each in turn in that order. And so we'll call on Jerry to go ahead and begin.
Thank you, James, for inviting me to speak here today on Asian American experiences of racism and anti-racism at the Reformed Church Center here at New Brunswick Theological Seminary. I am honored to be here with my esteemed colleagues, Reverend Thomas Song and Pastor Tiffany Fan. I am also very grateful to all who are in attendance via Zoom to learn more about how the three of us experience being Asian in America in the 21st century. For those of you who do not know me, I am Sansei, third generation Japanese American. My grandparents came from Japan in the early 1900s, over 100 years ago. Actually, on my mother's side, her grandparents, my great-grandparents, went to Hawaii to work the sugar or pineapple plantations. So my grandmother, Hatsumi Kato, was born on Hawaii when it was a territory of the United States. Both my parents were born and raised in California in 1919 and 1923. The defining moment for Japanese living in America was the bombing of Pearl Harbor on the day that will live in infamy, December 7th, 1941. That led to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signing Executive Order 9066, which forced all persons of Japanese descent living on the West Coast into internment camps in remote, godforsaken parts of the country. All my relatives, including my parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles, went first to horse stalls at the Tanforan racetracks and then to Tule Lake. My father's parents were then sent to Hart Mountain, Wyoming, and my mother's side went to Jerome, Arkansas. My father and Aunt Kiku, my mother's younger sister, with the help of the Quakers, who were conscientious objectors to the war, were able to attend college away from the West Coast after 6 months. And my mother left about a year later to go to college in Denver. I was born in 1950. Even though I was never in the camps, I was profoundly affected in my childhood because hatred of the Japanese was still strong after World War II. Nowadays, we have greater multiracial diversity in America, especially in large cities like New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. For many years, people have spoken about inclusivity and diversity. But in the 1950s and 60s, when I was going to school, bullying was not condemned as it is now. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me, is the mantra and lie that I grew up with. We moved around a lot when I was young, so I was the new kid in school 6 times, and being the outsider and teased was all too familiar. In the 5th grade, we moved to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I came running home crying, and my mother said, "Jerry, you just have to study hard and prove that you are smarter, better than they are." So all through school, I worked and studied hard to be top in my class. I was salutatorian of my all-white girls' school in Sewanee, Tennessee. I was Phi Beta Kappa spring semester of my junior year at Emory University in Atlanta, which at that time was mostly white and about 2/3 male. But no matter how hard I worked academically, I was never white enough to feel I was fully accepted. The sin of racism for me is the lie I believe about myself, that I am unworthy or worthless when I compare myself to others. I am ashamed of who I am, and I'm never good enough, no matter how hard I work to belong and to be accepted. I was an English major in college, but my career has been as an actor, which is ironic. Growing up, I felt I had to wear a mask, pretend to be like the other children, so I would be accepted, or at least by being very quiet and invisible, I could avoid being picked on and harassed. As an actor, I'm applauded for acting a part. I'm given permission to cry or scream or act silly. Whereas in my real life, I spend most of my time and energy hiding my real thoughts and feelings. I'm looking forward to hearing Thomas's and Tiffany's experience of being Asian in America, because they were born and raised in their home countries where they were part of the majority race. One of the stories I tell myself is that perhaps they have a better self-image than me because their identity was affirmed by the society and culture around them. Whereas my family was always the minority of one. Nobody else around me was Asian in my school, well, except for my younger sister. I only saw my relatives once or twice a year. I grew up thinking something was wrong or odd or peculiar about my family because we ate white rice for dinner every night, not mashed potatoes, rolls, or white bread. There was no Asian food in the supermarkets in Sewanee, Tennessee in the 1960s. We had to stock up on Japanese food when we went to Chicago or New York. In fact, I didn't learn to eat with chopsticks until I was 10 years old. My husband, who is no longer with us, reminds me that my life was not all bad. It is true that I am motivated to be a hardworking, high achiever, and many good things have happened in my life. I am not a whiner or complainer, but I do want to share what is real and true for me. I'm not looking for pity. I do believe that what others mean for evil, God uses for good, and that is certainly true in my case as well. Being left out as a child makes me sensitive and sympathetic to others on the margins, and for example, has led me to be active with disability concerns, ministry, and advocacy in my home church and in this denomination, the Reformed Church in America. After I started serving on the executive committee of the Council for Pacific and Asian American Ministries in the RCA in 2007, I started to get invitations to serve on different committees as a token Asian person, and once or twice as the only person of color, which was awkward, embarrassing, and a bit of a burden. But I see that my life experiences prepared me to be a spokesperson, an advocate for other Asians as well as for myself. For example, it has been a privilege and honor to serve on the Commission of Race and Ethnicity and other task forces, because I've met some really wonderful and amazing people who have taught and inspired me about racial issues in America. One humble learning is that I am not the only person to experience racism in this country. And in fact, many other African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, and other Asians have stories to share that have put my troubles into the larger context of how racism impacts people of color in this country. I do want to speak about the horrific killings of Asian women at the spas in Atlanta almost exactly 1 year ago. I was devastated when I heard the news because it triggered negative memories of my life in the South as a teenager and young adult, especially the way Southern men treated me as a sexual object. Southern women are placed on virginal pedestals, but women of color are used as disposable commodities. Asian women in particular are perceived as exotic, submissive, and willing sex objects. Since this pandemic started, and with it, the rise of anti-Asian attacks and microaggressions, I have been given the opportunity to speak out and advocate for understanding and allyship for my Asian sisters and brothers. First, Liz Testa and her team at Women's Transformation and Leadership invited me to videotape my response in April 2020. Then right after the attacks in Atlanta, JJ Tenclay, the coordinator for Refugee and Migrant Ministries, posted my video on This Is My Story on faithword.com. In December, Reverend Grace Rohr, the minister at the Taiwanese Presbyterian Church in New Jersey, invited me to give a presentation on Stop Asian Hate, Sink or Swim, or Survive and Thrive. I feel that God is leading me to use my voice to share my experiences with others, to help us all understand each other better. James asked us to talk about what the church and the RCA can do to address anti-Asian racism in their communities. I have 2 points, and I am sure Thomas and Tiffany have more ideas from their context. I believe that learning how to be an ally is a practical tool that we all can use, and not just for Asians, but for all people of color, and also in situations where people are attacked or mistreated due to sexual orientation, disability, ageism, etc. When a situation arises where you see someone being attacked or bullied, please speak up or at least come alongside the person. Call 911 if it is violent and you do not want to expose yourself to harm. Please remember that silence and doing nothing is perceived by the perpetrator and by the victim as complicity, carelessness, indifference, or even endorsement of the perpetrator's actions and words. There are good trainings available about specific things to do or say. My second point is to get to know people who are different from you on an individual basis. Everyone has their own story to tell. The benign racism I find difficult to deal with is when someone assumes they know my story. I feel uncomfortable when the nice woman or gentleman comes up to me in the coffee hour. Oh, my son married a Japanese girl. She is so sweet and we all just love her to death. I know they are reaching for a connection with me, but I am embarrassed. I have spent my whole life saying, I am American. I'm not Japanese. I'm not a bit like their lovely daughter-in-law. Even within the Japanese American community, there is a great and wide variety of experiences and opinions. I cannot presume to say I know what it's like to be Korean American or Taiwanese American. I just want you to get to know me for being me. Thank you so much for listening. There's much more that I would like to share. I am willing, interested, and available to come to your church or community to speak about my experiences of what it means to be Asian American and how that has impacted my faith journey. I can do this via Zoom or in person once traveling in person becomes safe. Thank you so much. Thank you, James.
And thank you, Jerry, for sharing your perspective here today. Now we'll ask Thomas to go ahead and share his. Thomas?
Thank you for inviting me to this important event, and I'm glad to be with my fellow RCA colleagues, including host James Bloom and the guest panels Jerry Yoshida and Tiffany Wang. I came to America when I was a college student, and I came with two sisters. The first thing we had to do in American life was settling down to have financial security. So my family had a small business, kind of mom and pop store style, and we worked very hard, from 6 a.m. to the 9 p.m. So when I reflect on what happened at the time, I mean, I don't think that I can do it again. And at the same time, because we worked hard, we could buy a home with our own name, our own names, and then we were very happy, and we were very proud of it. And however, when we moved into a new house, a few days later, a group of teenagers appeared, and they began to throw small stones to our houses. And one of the stones will hit. One of the stones actually directly hit one of our windows, and then obviously that window was broke down. And recently, my father mentioned that, did you see the broken glass of the window? Then I answered yes, and that that happened when we just moved in to this house. For a few decades while I was living in America, I completely forgot about it, and I didn't pay attention to it. But at the moment my father mentioned about it, obviously there was kind of a big moment that brought me to the past and felt a pain, and that really reflection on what is going on today in America, especially about anti-Asian racism. Last year, when COVID was severe, my family went to a trip in Long Island, and I saw the large shade of a tree. So I went to that area, and then there was one couple, white senior couple, but they had a thick English accent as well. That means they meant to be they were foreigners too. But as soon as I enter into the shade, then they began to scream and yelling, and then there was obviously a response that they were fearful with my appearance, and they're fearful with the pandemic, COVID-19 situation. So they treat me as a COVID carrier. But on the other side, there was a tree too, and then there was big shade also. But multiple couples was sitting each other without any social distance. So that was quite interesting. At the same time, they raised my anger too. As Jerry mentioned, the gun violent event of Atlanta area spot shootings, mostly against Asians. That was a very painful moment to all Asians, I believe. And as Jerry mentioned, the image of Asian women has an image in this society as being exotic, sexually attractive, and domestically oriented. And it is very difficult to separate out an individual's sexual proclivities from the way society sexualizes Asian women. And this is not my word. This is a word of a socialist. Especially, I was very upset when I was watching on TV, at the time, the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office Captain Jerry Baker was making public report after that tragic massacre. But he said like this: he was the gunman was pretty much fed up and kind of at the end of his rope. Yesterday was a really bad day for him, and this is what he did. So his, the murdering activities were justified because he was tired and he was a man, and he could do it because he was a white man. That reflection of what the local sheriff office captain said really provoked the anger of Asian Americans. Indeed, this sheriff, Baker, posted photos of the shirts blaming China for the pandemic last March and April, COVID-19. The shirt reads in a font resembling of the logo of Corona beer. And it says, imported virus from China. Anybody could imagine someone who has this kind of a mental attitude can treat this kind of massacre in certain perspective. And indeed, this was greatly influenced by those politicians who seek popularity, like former President Donald Trump. I like to see this tragic massacre in one more dimension to see from this society. The murderer as a hate crime and sex addiction, both. Justification with a mental health issue cannot be right when we talk about hate crimes. A decade ago, I was serving a Korean church in Bayside, Queens. My church got broken stained glass, and we found that a big stone was lying under the window, broken window glass. And I found out also several other Asian churches got same damages. So that was obvious that one guy did the same thing over and over again. And the police treat this as just a light crime. So here is a big question. What's going to happen when our justice system malfunctions or ignore this kind of racism and violence related to racism and hatred? It is a serious problem to make our society divisive and even violent. When we are insensitive or even ignore hatred and hatred-related crimes, people do evil things openly and even proudly without shame and guilt, because these people know that there will be no punishments from the justice system of our society. When our justice system functions correctly, people know that they will receive a proper punishment, legal punishment, or social disadvantage. Then they will do much less engagement of hate crimes or even hateful gestures against other people. Indeed, history of anti-Asian racism has a long history. Anti-Asian xenophobia and the bias in the United States dates back to the 19th century, when the Page and Chinese Exclusion Act shut out would-be immigrants. and peaked during World War II during the forced incarceration of Japanese Americans. The modern minority, on the other side, it's a myth. It is a myth that Asian Americans are unilaterally successful, well adapted, because they are quiet, hardworking, and even submissive. In fact, this stereotype was malfunctioned or manufactured during the civil rights movement to weaponize Asian Americans against Black Americans. So who created this myth? Modern minority. So what is going on lately? Anti-Asian hate crimes surged by 169% across the 15 major US cities between year 2020 and 2021, according to the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism at California State University, San Bernardino. The Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism published the compilation of hate crime data. Hate crimes against Asian American increased by 339% only in year 2021. Why? Why the hate crimes are being continued in our society, especially why against Asian Americans? It's strongly related to the coronavirus, yet it is also related to the politicians who seek popularism, just like former President Donald Trump. He still does. Trump's racist nicknames for the coronavirus as the China virus and the Kung flu largely drove the spike in anti-Asian incidents. And there is no guilt in committing in this kind of hate crimes. Increases in racist rhetoric have coincided with increases in racist attacks. So since February last year, Asians and the people of Asian descent around the world have been subjected to attacks and beatings, violent bullying, threats, racist abuse, and the discrimination that appear linked to the pandemic. So when I say February, that can be February in 2020. So while these kind of things are happening broadly and vastly, we should pay attention to the mental health issues to Asian Americans and the Asian descendants. Early research has linked the uptick in anti-Asian discrimination to increase in anxiety, depressive symptoms, and the sleep problems among those who are targeted. Of course, anger issue is a big thing too. And the getting help is not always easy to them. It's very difficult because of language and because of there is a misconception on the mental health aid. Many Asians believe that mental health aid is just for the crazy people, schizophrenic people. But racism is real. And the racism is real to not only Asians, but Asian descendants as well. I was watching on TV, and it was about George Conway's mother was an organic chemist from the Philippines, and George Conway was expressed about his personal experience, which his mother was discriminated and experienced racist comments against his mom when he was a teen. A white man approached to his mother and to go back to your country. There was a moment that the George Conway directly experienced racism against Asians. And he expressed that on a public TV interview. On the other side, to teenagers, Asian pop culture is more and more familiar. Asian music, Asian movies, Asian dramas, and even Asian computer games. These are more and more popular to teenagers. It's a good surface indeed. Asian pop culture is trending worldwide. BTS is hot. Squid Game on Netflix was hot. These new phenomena make me to be proud of that I am Korean and I have the Korean heritage. And I can see that the representation of Asian people in Hollywood has significantly improved. However, there was a big incident. There was a movie. Korean American director wrote script and made a movie Minari. And he made a movie in US with his personal story. He made a movie with American money. He made a movie with American film crews. Yet his movie was nominated not in domestic film areas, categories, but his film was nominated as the best foreign film. Everyone was shocked. The movie was made by American director with American crews and even with American capital campaign, but it was nominated in the best foreign film category. And you saw that last year, the Golden Globe Award had a great reformation in relation to this kind of a racism in that Golden Globe Award party, the organization party. So racism is deeply rooted in our society. It takes a long time to remove. But on the other side, there are some people who think that Asians are color people to whites, but not colorful enough to Afro-Americans. Recently, I had an opportunity to have a conversation with an Afro-American woman. And in dialogue, the woman said to me, "You don't respect the color people." Then I was shocked. What do you mean by that? And then the conversation was continued, and then it was more likely a misunderstanding, and then the conversation was ended with a more peaceful condition. However, there was very interesting moment. The Afro-American woman claimed that I was not colorful enough or enough color. I don't have enough color to her. Someone say that it can also create the perception that Asian Americans are not considered to be people of color and that we are immune to racism. In the, this was, the Asian American scholar said. And this person also mentioned that therefore, when people do speak up about it, racism, then our experiences as Asians are actually dismissed easily. So I'd like to talk about two important action plans. So what shall we do? First, we should empower individuals to take action. We should have relationships with other people, yet we must, Asian people must have a clear understanding of who we are, and we must have an emphasis on our own dignity. As individuals, overcoming the bystander effect is one of the most direct and most powerful approaches to combating anti-Asian racism. And then the next one is important too. The work within the system to create awareness. In addition to fighting anti-Asian racism as individuals, we can also make a lasting impact on our society through what I call coalition or connection building for good people and the good intentions. So I believe that this is to mobilize our fellow the citizens and the friends and neighbors by raising public awareness and motivating collective efforts to fight racism. Racism is everywhere. Yet we can overcome only when we are very clear about it is evil. And when we are aware of everyone has human dignity equally. And when we have a good system to build in our society together, then I think the racism can be declined. Thank you for listening to my small talk.
Thank you, Thomas. And now we'll hear from Tiffany Pham.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to Reformed Church Center to speak about my experience on Asian racism. And it is an honor to speak alongside with my wonderful colleague, Jerry and Reverend Song. Let me share my PowerPoint. As you can see that I am not an expert on anti-racism or anything like that. However, I'm going to share through my own lens and my worldview from my experience. And my name is Tiffany Pham, and I was raised in Taiwan and in a really traditional Chinese culture. And when I was a teenager, I moved to America, and it was in Texas. So from my market and my school, moved to my target and the football team. So I think since teenage year until now, I received both sides of the culture. I have traditional Chinese cultural value alongside with Western cultural values, and they are pretty much side by side. And I am both, but also neither at the same time. I'm also speaking through where my ministry is. My ministry is, we are in Bronx, and it started out as a full Chinese study group and then a Chinese congregation, and then we started English congregation. Now English and Chinese congregation go side by side, and it's multicultural. Although we don't have many people, we are small, but we have a sprinkle of different cultures in our church. And what my experience of working through in my personal life and also in the church life and maneuvering through different cultures, no matter it's Eastern, Western, Hispanic, or South Pacific, or I realized that different culture, we have different system, we have different honoring system, especially in Asian culture. In my culture where I was raised, that we are operating in an honor and shame system. And that means that everything that we do, how we act and our attitude will give us like honor points in the society. And it is deemed to be like the right thing to do. And there is a worldview of this is what you should achieve. And every culture has this. Every culture has something that everyone think, oh, in that culture, it will be respectful. And this is honorable, and this is good. And there are also things that in certain culture that you shun it, that you don't think that's good, or it's not honorable. It is not which one is right or wrong, but the difference make us wonderful and different, but also the difference make us to have misunderstandings and clashes sometimes. Like in where I was raised in Eastern culture. In Chinese culture, that we value this. This is a huge umbrella of what we were raised in, and we value collectivism. And that means that we are striving to be one of the community, and we are supposed to be the community. If you look at the sports news in Taiwan or in China, they report the baseball, the whole team news, and it's rarely highlighted any individual player. But however, in Western, that we value, is also we for me, we value individualism. And it is looked highly upon like we are different and is respected. And we even better to be outstanding, to be different than others. And that is something that's good. And we value individualism in Western culture. But however, like under that big umbrella, there are something that's different, I notice. For example, Chinese people, where I come from, we value meekness. And it is looked highly upon and honorable to be meek and to be humble and to seek peace in the group. As you can see that before we talk about collectivism, and that collectivism is to blend in, is to be one with your community. It's not to stand out, not to be the special one, but to keep a harmony inside this whole big group. And while the Western may probably uplift audacity, that you should be different, that you have the courage to voice a different opinion, while that was not we seek, the Eastern culture might seek to be the honorable things to do, because that tend to break the harmony inside the group. And as we say that this is not right or wrong, this is not which one's better, this is not, but it's people from different background and with different stories. Chinese culture, that we honor moderation, like Paul says, moderation, let your moderation be known, let your humbleness be known, let your reasonableness be known. So we tend to stand in the middle in our opinions and not to be extreme, and keep a leeway for reasoning, and keep a So it's good to be right somehow somewhere in the middle. So we are not too right or too left, while that Western culture might value expression. So in a group that you probably would be right in the middle, and we are probably tend not to say anything. We're probably not going to remember that we want to be one with the group. We want to be one and blend in the whole community. And so that being right in the middle and following everything is what we strive for, while that expressing your feeling is valued in Western culture. Chinese, where my culture is, that we tend to hide the expression in order to keep harmony. But in real life, this has often happened. For example, in a company, the Chinese employee might seem happy, might seem working, have good work ethic and very efficient and seem to be good in the group. And then suddenly that this person resigned. And the company might feel very baffled. Like, why? I thought you were happy. Because this is how Chinese people with Chinese culture might be dealing with something in the system. Imagine that you want to be one with the system, but you cannot accept, or the system is not treating you right, or you feel hurt in this system or in this big group. And a lot of the time, the Chinese people would withdraw themselves instead of expressing their opinion, expressing that I'm not happy with the system, or I'm not happy with how you do things. They would rather withdraw. So just like in a church, that we might have Chinese congregants that seems pretty normal and happy and suddenly left the church without saying a word. And the pastor were baffled and don't know what's going on, because they are probably not the one wanting to express how they feel. They probably experienced something in the community and they were hurt, but they would just quietly leave. And that is also a big difference. And as you can see, that if a culture that values and think it's honorable to be obedient and to be one with the group, we have no problem obey the authority, because that's where everybody goes. That's what we are going to listen to. And so we are all going to obey. And while that Western culture might value freedom, that I have my freedom to do, to access my right, but while the Chinese culture might want to obey the authority, because that's how we know where does the whole group, how to be a collective group and how to be harmoniously existing in that community. So as you can see, that this might bring a lot of misunderstanding and miscommunications, and we might bring up pointing fingers and then why you do this and why you do that. This is not just between cultures. This is also happening in Chinese families. While our second generation were raised in a Western value, it is really hard to communicate with different generations that why this cultural value is different and why I feel the way I feel, why the older generation is striving for peace and the younger generation is striving for maybe revolution or maybe freedom or expression. So it is not only between culture, but also within Chinese family as well. And while that we are all in America and blending with everybody that who comes from different cultures and to have different story and backgrounds, that how to fit in became a big question. Like, how do we fit in this new environment? And usually Chinese people would choose, remember that we want to be one with the community, we want to fit in the community, we want to be the same with everybody, while this everybody is very, very different. So a lot of the time that Chinese people would choose to be silent and invisible and thinking this is the right way to blend in into a community that is so diverse. So while that Western culture might think that you should learn and conquer a new environment, while that Chinese people trying to keep silent and invisible and thinking that's the honorable things to do. You can imagine that how this would be very confusing for people with Chinese background, that coming from this background, while our culture value and say that all these things, the meekness, the moderation, the obedience, and being silent and invisible, they are good, they're honorable, and you are doing the right thing. While that there are people saying, or probably pointing finger and saying that, no, what you're doing is wrong, or this is not the right value. So it is for a lot of the Chinese population that this is a very confusing experience and also a very hurting experience, because imagine that you think that you are doing the right thing. Imagine that you are thinking you're doing the honorable thing while then people shun you for it. And so it is very confusing experience. A lot of time that dealing with racism, it's actually the clash of different cultural values. So at the end, I am thinking I'll bring up what Jesus actually challenged us with one of his parable of Good Samaritan that we all know. That here it says that Jesus replied, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him and beat him and went away and leaving him half dead. And in this story that we all know, okay, Good Samaritan, you're supposed to help people. But I love it that Jesus used this example that, yeah, we all come from different cultures. And this person from Jerusalem to Jericho, you have no idea what kind of person this could be at that time, that you tell people from different classes by what they are wearing and what kind of ethnicity by how their accent is. But this person is stripped, so that you cannot tell what kind of classes or what kind of job this person do. And you cannot tell like what kind of ethnicity. Is this a Samaritan? Is this a Roman? Is this a Jew? You have no idea. But this person laying there that needs help. And I feel Jesus challenging us that while you don't know, and we all have different stories, we might all wearing different clothes, different classes, and we might have different backgrounds. And it's so hard to maneuver between all the different values. But coming down, when we stripped off our classes and our race, that we are humanity. And here Jesus challenged us that if you see humanity that needs help, do you help? And so that's my sharing for today. And hopefully, I don't know what's the next step, but that I pray that God will guide us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. And also thank you to Jerry and to Thomas again. It was so wonderful to be able to have all three of you here and to share your experiences and help all of us understand a little more about this aspect of racism and about the challenges of anti-racism when it comes to this sort of thing. We are glad to have had all of you here with us today, and I look forward to seeing all of you at another Reformed Church Center program very soon. Goodbye.